welcome. My name is Ayush Alavadi and you're watching Prime Time. Let's have a look at today's top stories. The Supreme Court gives legal sanctity to passive euthanasia, also upholds the concept of a living will for people suffering from terminal diseases. Moody's says more than Trump's tariffs, the retaliation to the tariffs by the US's trade partners could hurt India. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance recommends a hike in LTCG tax exemption limits up to 2 lakh rupees. Some of NSE's existing investors are looking for a way out after the ongoing co-location case delays the proposed IPO. Court sends Karti Chidambaram to CBI custody for 3 more days in relation to the INX media case. Also allows the CBI to confront Karthi along with his chartered accountant. All right, we're going to start with our top story of the day. A 5-judge Supreme Court bench has upheld passive euthanasia. The apex court also gave legal sanctity to living wills, which allows a person to choose euthanasia in case he or she is declared to be in a vegetative state. Arpan Chaturvedi, who was in the courtroom, gets us all the details in this report.
Well, this was a 5-judge bench judgment which was by 5-0, and there were 4 different opinions, but all of them leading to the same conclusion that passive euthanasia and the concept of living will should be legally recognized. Basically, what a living will is that an individual can declare that if he reaches a state where he is incurable and in a vegetative state, a life support system should be withdrawn, and that has now been given legal sanctity along with the passive euthanasia. This ruling comes on a petition filed by NGO Common Cause through Advocate Prashant Bhushan, and the government of course had opposed the recognition of legal living will on the grounds that there is potential for enormous misuse, but the court of course has disagreed, and in a ruling by which was read out first by the Chief Justice of India, the court has said that right to die with dignity is also a fundamental right, and therefore the concept of passive euthanasia and living wills are finally being legally recognized by the Supreme Court of India.
Very good judgment, and I wholeheartedly welcome this. There are many ways of ensuring that this is not misused. You can leave a video record of your last desire, and you see, the person concerned knows exactly how he feels when he is not well, and if he is in constant pain, and if the hospitalization is not helping at all, he should be entitled to die. Right to die, right to life means right to life with dignity. And since right to life includes right to die, one should be able to die with dignity.
Well, guidelines are for the purposes of preventing abuse, because there is also possibility that for the purpose of property, for the purpose of inheritance, for many other purposes, this particular permissibility is likely to be or is vulnerable to abuse. So guidelines are there, but then just as we have Article 21, a right to life, we must have right to die too.
Now, the Supreme Court's ruling was a plea filed in 2005 by NGO Common Cause that sought a recognition of a living will so that individuals could exercise the right to refuse medical treatment at a terminally ill stage of life. To discuss this particular judgment, I am now joined by Vipul Mudgal, Director at Common Cause.
No, we are very happy because, you see, first time the idea of living will has been recognized by the court. We are also happy that this has been done by a constitutional bench of the Supreme Court of India, which means that it is a very, very considered judgment. And we are also happy that the entire idea of patient autonomy and the very fact that a patient has autonomy over his or her body has been recognized by the court. So in principle, whatever our prayers were have been met. And of course, government will finally bring in a legislation, and we hope that the legislation will include these ideas, particularly the idea of living will, because the idea for Common Cause was that that a person when he or she is in complete command of herself, should be able to write, should I be subjected to the following? Should I be terminally ill? Should I be in vegetative state? I must not be subjected to unnecessary medical intrusion. So I think that was the idea, and we succeeded in that.
Right, Mr. Mudgal, but while the Supreme Court was very clear in today's order, which is a good 500 odd pages, but Mr. Mudgal, what I want to understand from you is that while the government was arguing this on the other side in court, they made it very clear that while in principle they have agreed to passive euthanasia, but in terms of living will, they are still, they haven't warmed up to the idea of living will, saying that this is one, against the public policy of India, and two, it is also essentially what they did argue was that there is scope for misuse. Is that something that could be a problem a little later, considering that these guidelines and directives only operate until a legislation replaces them?
That is true, but you see, it is also correct that all laws can be misused. There is no single law in the entire statute book which cannot be misused. Our point is that living will is an idea whose time has come. You see, there is a situation where the hospitals are putting you on long ventilation much after it's become very clear that the patient has died, only because they want to extract more and more money out of you. So with the advancement of technology in medical sciences, there should also be change in medical ethics. And there, the idea of living will becomes very important. You see, we are not in support of active euthanasia. We are not saying that India should go for assisted suicides. All we are saying that in a situation where I come into some kind of a vegetative state, or if I'm terminally ill with no chance of recovering, then I should not be subjected to unnecessary intrusion, and instead of my lawyer or my doctor or my relatives deciding, it should be me who should decide. And where is the problem? I can do that when I'm in complete command of myself. So I think the governments, to say, take a charitable view, the governments are generally conservative. And that is the problem is that they don't want to stick their neck out and just stay what it is. So as a result, what happens? Somebody is lying in bed for 42 years and nobody has the right to pull the plug because you'll become a murderer. I think it's important for the dignity of the person. And that is why our prayer, the common cause prayer in the petition, was that the right to die with dignity is a part to right to life.
Right, Mr. Mudgal, and since you were talking about the government's conservative stance, I'd like to list a few things, because even in this particular order, these things have been mentioned from previous cases. In terms of the government's stance, when there was a Law Commission report earlier on the medical termination of terminally ill patients bill of 2006, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare seemed to come up with a number of reasons enumerated in that order as well. But I'll just take 2-3 for the sake of brevity. One being the fact that an individual may wish to die at a certain point of time. His or her wish may not be persistent and only a fleeting desire out of transient depression. The wish of euthanasia by a mentally ill patient in depression may be treatable by good psychiatric care. And suffering is a state of mind and a perception which varies from individual to individual and depends on various other factors. And the continuous advancement in medical science has made possible many sort of methods for the patient to recover. And perhaps the doctor wouldn't really know when they would recover from such a particular state. These were the arguments made. Just to play devil's advocate, Mr. Mudgal, do you think these arguments still carry any weight, or they still hold true?
You see, I was losing you in between, so I'm just guessing a few things. You see, the point is that there would always be, it is a matter of life and death, and there will always be very deep ethical issues involved in every case. There was a case recently in Mirzapur district of Uttar Pradesh where a very poor man sought the permission for terminating the lives of 4 of his sons. Three of them are teenagers, I believe, and one of them is in early 20s, and they are all paralyzed neck down, and obviously they were not allowed. There was another case in which a daily wage laborer, had his wife in coma for continuously 2 years, and his whatever little property was sold. His son, who was going in a primary school in 4th or 5th class, was taken off the school because he couldn't afford it. So suddenly you realize that it's a hugely poor country. If you can form an expert committee. This was also one of our prayers, in which you can have social scientists, you can have lawyers, you can have doctors. Let them discuss, let them deliberate, on the ethical side of the issue, and take a decision. Why do you have to say a no to everything? Examine the issues, see the global best practices, see what is going on in the rest of the world, see how hospitals are exploiting people, and take a decision after that.
Right, Ms. Mudgal, and those are all fair points. And just as a final point, just to understand from you, based on the prayers made in this particular case and your petition, I believe that what's come out of this ruling is that these directions and guidelines will continue to operate till a new law is in force. Your plea, I believe, was that the new law should be on the lines of the Patient Autonomy and Self-Determination Act of the USA. Are we going to take any cues from other countries around the world?
Yeah, but it is also not in force in entire USA. It's there in some part in Netherlands, it's there in Belgium, it's there in Switzerland, and perhaps in some states, I guess, it is there in Washington and Montana and probably Oregon. So it's not there in force in entire United States. But, as I said, this is something whose time has come. You see, when this case was filed in 2005, you can imagine it was definitely ahead of its time. But we see all around us, complete misery. We also see the way the hospitals misuse everything that is available to them, how there is money extraction going on from the poor, hapless, relatives of patients. So the laws have to catch up with reality. The medical ethics also has to catch up with reality. And in that light, we are not saying that accept what Common Cause is saying. We have also said in the prayers that please make a committee of experts. Let them deliberate on the philosophical aspects of it, on the social and cultural aspects of it, and on, of course, the medical aspects and ethical aspects of it. I think there will be a way out, but we were very dissatisfied with the draft legislation earlier, which did not even mention the living will, which I think is a prejudgment.
Absolutely, Mr. Mudgal. Really appreciate you joining us on a big day for you as well, and a big day for the country. And thanks so much for speaking to us on Bloomberg Quint. All right, that's the top story of the day. So we will speak more on this particular story on Primetime Debate today, where we'll be joined by Prashant Bhushan, Senior Advocate at the Supreme Court, and Dr. Jayesh Lele, National Secretary to the Hospital Board of the Indian Medical Association. Now, in other news, the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance has recommended a higher exemption limit for capital gains tax. Remember, the budget had proposed to reintroduce the LTCG on all gains over 1 lakh rupees. Nikunj Johri breaks down the recommendations of the committee in this report.
The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance has recommended increasing the threshold of exemption limit of long-term capital gains tax to rupees 2 lakh from 1 lakh that was proposed in this year's budget. The reason given by the panel is to protect the interests of small investors and have a fair distinction between small or retail investors and large investors like corporate and financial institutions. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance has also sought a detailed inquiry in the PNB fraud, besides the ongoing investigations carried by various investigating agencies. The panel has asked Department of Financial Services under the Ministry of Finance to conduct a comprehensive inquiry in the PNB fraud case and submit details within a month to the panel of all the officials who were involved in the scam and all the other system-related issues.
Moving on, uncertainty over the co-location probe is making investors in the National Stock Exchange nervous. Some of the existing investors have started selling their stake whenever they get a good price. So are investors booking profits? Sajid Mangat has all the details in this report.
That's right. Ayush, over the last 6 months, we have seen a lot of domestic institutional investors and some of the foreign investors looking at exit option as far as NSE is concerned. And this is primarily because the IPO timeline has been delayed, especially after SEBI has returned the consent application for the exchange. What we understand is that many of the investors are looking at part exit options. Investors like IDBI Bank, you have BOB, you have IFCI. Some of the foreign investors at Norwest Venture Partners are looking at part exit primarily because the valuation in the private market, which is basically an OTC market, has gone past the IPO valuation which the exchange was seeking at the time of filing of draft red herring prospectus in December 2016. In December 2016, NSE was supposed to come out with an IPO of 10,000 crore that valued the exchange at 45,000 crores. And in the last few months, the deals which have happened in the private market, where institutions like IFC have sold at a valuation of more than 45,000, in fact at 46,000 crores. And we understand that Norwest Partners deal will go as high as 50,000 crores. So that's some of the reasons why the exits are happening. But what is more interesting is some of the pre-IPO funds are also coming into the exchange. We have seen IIFL Special Opportunities Fund and several HNIs coming into NSE, and the principal reason for that is that they expect that the IPO will happen in the next 12 to 18 months, and as and when that happens, they will be able to cash in on the premium that the IPO will have of nearly 25 to 30%. So that's an interesting trend which is coming in on the NSE shares.
All right, in other news, US President Donald Trump followed through on his pledge to impose stiff tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Trump, however, excluded Canada and Mexico and left the door open to spare other countries on the basis of national security. The tariffs have been set at 25% for steel and 10% for aluminium and will come into effect in the next 15 days. Here's what Donald Trump had to say about his latest measure to protect American trade.
We have to protect and build our steel and aluminum industries, while at the same time showing great flexibility and cooperation toward those that are really friends of ours, both on a trade basis and a military basis. We're going to be doing a reciprocal tax program at some point, so that if China is going to charge us 25%, or if India is going to charge us 75%, and we charge them nothing, if they're at 50, or they're at 75, or they're at 25, we're going to be at those same numbers. It's called reciprocal. It's a mirror tax. So they charge us 50, we charge them 50. Right now, they'll charge us 50, we charge them nothing. Doesn't work.
It's not the Trump tariffs, but the retaliation to it by the trade partners of the US that should impact India more. That's the assessment of the managing director at Moody's Investors Services, Mary Durant. Speaking to Bloomberg Quint earlier today, Durant said such retaliation could hurt global trade. However, she said that the tariffs on steel and aluminium will not have a major impact on the Indian economy. Listen in.
What would affect the sovereign credit profile is indeed through that growth channel. And so what would really start to have an impact would be measures that, one, are broad-based, so are really across broad sectors, as opposed to specific products, and measures that then kind of give rise to kind of counter actions. And so we would get into a very different kind of trade policy framework that businesses would potentially start factoring in their investment decisions. If businesses can no longer assume that really trade is evolving as they have been used to in the last couple of decades, then that would start permeating into certain investment decisions, and that would kind of amplify the impact on growth. We cannot at this stage really be very specific about pinpointing certain sectors and certain countries. It is very much about the interaction between these decisions, their scope both at the industry level and at the geographic level. India as a whole does not really rely to any degree on exports of steel and aluminum to the US. It is a very, very small fraction of its GDP. So directly the impact will not be felt. It might be felt on specific kind of manufacturers, but not at the economy scale. If there were to be broader disruptions of trade and growth in the region, in Asia as a whole, then India, like others, would be affected. But again, India is not particularly reliant on trade, unlike some other economies in the region. So it would not be really one of the ones kind of most affected. It would be impacted by really global and regional disruptions. But we would think that in most plausible scenarios, really the effect on GDP growth will be relatively small.
And there's more news from the White House. US President Donald Trump has agreed to meet with Kim Jong Un. This comes after the North Korean leader said he was committed to denuclearization. Well, to discuss this further and this proposed meeting between the two leaders, we're joined by Kasia Klimasinska of Bloomberg News. Kasia, thanks so much for joining us on Bloomberg Quint. I want to understand from you, does this development do anything to ease geopolitical tensions in the Korean Peninsula? And how will this shift from decades of US policy be perceived, especially by US allies?
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a very interesting question, especially as we have very few details so far. So the time and place of the meeting has not been set yet. So far, the response from around the world has been cautiously optimistic. As you said, this has not happened before. It will be the first meeting with a sitting US president.
Right, Kasia, and also how would this really be perceived by US allies?
So we have yet to see the details, but so far Japan has been cautiously optimistic. President Trump spoke with his Japanese and Chinese counterparts, and he has reiterated that the US will keep the pressure on. It will not lift the sanctions until there is visible, tangible progress from North Korea. But for sure, US allies around the world will be watching those talks very cautiously.
Absolutely, Kasia. Really appreciate you taking the time out and joining us live from DC. Now, moving on, the French President Emmanuel Macron kicks off his 4-day tour of India today. The two nations, India and France, are expected to discuss the Rafale air fighter deal, which has been wrapped in controversy for some time now. Macron, who's traveling with his wife, will be meeting the Indian Prime Minister tomorrow before heading to Agra and Varanasi on Sunday. A Delhi court today extended Karti Chidambaram's custody by 3 days. Karthi will now remain in police custody till March 12th in connection with the INX media corruption case. The court has also allowed the CBI to interrogate Karthi with his CAs, Bhaskar Raman, who was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate on February 16th. Before commencing the proceedings on Karthi, the court also extended the judicial custody of his CA, S. Bhaskar Raman, till March 22nd. In other news, President Ramnath Kovind has accepted the resignations of the Telugu Desam Party ministers Ashok Gajapati Raju and Y.S. Chaudhary with immediate effect. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be in charge of the Civil Aviation Ministry. Now, former Congress President and senior party leader Sonia Gandhi has stepped up her attack on the current government. Speaking at the India Today conclave in New Delhi, Gandhi said that freedom is under assault and alternative voices are being stifled. She also said that the current BJP government does not respect parliamentary procedure, unlike the Vajpayee-led NDA government. Sonia's comments come just a day after Congress President Rahul Gandhi accused the BJP of playing nasty politics. Speaking in Singapore, Rahul also said that the Modi government is destroying Gandhi's vision for India. There certainly seems to be a common thread to this combined attack by mother and son. And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Sanjay Pogale, editorial director at Quintillion Media. Mr. Pogale, thanks so much for speaking to us. Now, clearly there seems to be some sort of common narrative there. There's a common thread then in terms of the things that was said. I wanted to get your take on whether this is really a coordinated joint, the first signs of a coordinated, planned joint attack by the Gandhis just before, a year before the crucial election.
It may be a coordinated thing and it may not be, but more importantly, there is a cohesion and comprehension that what kind of challenge the Congress party is facing. So far, we have party position on various political issues to oppose the NDA government. I have found them to be bit tentative, bit random, bit ad hoc. Now, these two observations in last 2 days, they give a sense that they are understanding the challenge, the magnitude of the challenge. So in terms of idea, in terms of critique, in terms of analysis of the situation, yeah, they have definitely shown that they are getting it. They are understanding what challenges they are facing.
Also, you know, Mr. Pogale, it becomes interesting because they've, like you said, they've both called today's political environment nasty. And it's just before this particular election. And I want to understand from you whether this is the right approach, considering that the family name does come with some baggage, and considering, well, what they are really saying is that this old vision of theirs is to be projected as the new vision for India. Isn't there a little bit of a mismatch over there?
That is the problem. I would call it that you have given me a good critique, fine. What are you going to do about the future of the country? What is your political narrative, which is relative to me? Saying that it is nasty and it is regressive. And yeah, of course, one can argue that this government is really pushing a regressive or a nativist kind of narrative. But what is your alternative narrative which appeals to the new generation or the new India? I think they are still to come up with that kind of political narrative. And how do then they communicate? I, again, have been talking about it and I want to underline it again. Mrs. Gandhi has used the word that we were out-marketed in 2014. If now you think that marketing, which means communication, which means that going and talking to the lowest common denominator in an effective manner and selling your ideas, galvanizing him and getting his or her vote, what are you going to do in next 1 year? And that gives a very, not very encouraging sense that they really comprehend the challenge, then they can come up with a new narrative, they can come up with a new communication, and they can capture the imagination of the people or at least convince them to vote for them. That is still absent, and we have to watch this space for that. Because I have been again and again saying, the way Mr. Modi is going around about electioneering, he is always in campaign mode. The way this party works is unimaginable. We haven't seen some of the campaigning of this scale in this country ever. I am still not sure whether Congress party gets that.
Right, you know, Mr. Pogale, I really appreciate you joining us. And since we have you here, I just have one last question for you, especially based on today's comments made by Sonia Gandhi at that particular conference, and we were playing some of them out on the show as well. Mr. Pogale, you know, especially, let's talk about some things like the employment situation. Everyone knows the employment situation is grim, but all of a sudden we are told 7.5 million jobs were created in 2017. There was a slew of allegations that she made today. Do you think any of them were warranted, or any of them, if we take them at face value, really would hold true?
I would say on jobs, her analysis, she has basically reflected what has been spoken a lot in media and public conversation, that this government presents data in a certain manner and it twists the data, and suddenly this whole EPFO data of 7 million jobs being created was thrown out, and then we found some fault with that data and that calculation. So yeah, job is an issue which is very important issue, touches everyone. But then if you are coming with very heady, nativist and prejudiced kind of issues from Mandir to Murti, then you know what captures the public conversation more, what dominates the discussion. All these base instinct wala arguments, they dominate more in people's mind. How do you convey these ideas which are a bit intellectual? Even if they are not intellectual, they are very real. How do you communicate and make your compelling argument? So again, I'm coming to that point that Mrs. Gandhi's speech today was not of a chief executive officer. It was a speech of a non-executive chairman who was being very candid about the weaknesses or the incapabilities of her own party. She did underline all of those things. And she said that, yeah, the problem has been how do we work at the organizational level and how do we communicate things to people. So if she has diagnosed it right, now she should come up with a counter narrative which is equally engaging as Mr. Modi's narrative is.
You know, and those are fair points, because we consider Prime Minister Modi's campaign, and we consider the fact that he won the biggest mandate in over 3 decades by projecting a particular future, a vision. Some of these things seem interesting, but based on your understanding, do you think this is something now that we will go into almost election campaign mode very soon, we'll see these attacks grabbing the headlines a lot more often now?
A lot more often, and it is going to be extremely sharp, extreme kind of allegations and the strategies and counter strategies we are going to see. Yeah, they are going to be quite troubling and disturbing. But outpacing that kind of narrative is a real challenge that this country and Indian democracy faces. Indian democracy means that there should be an equally strong voice of dissent, and that should be heard. That is the challenge opposition parties, and especially the Congress party, has to come to terms with and show how they are going to handle that kind of situation. Yeah, be ready for a next 1 year campaign by the ruling party, which is going to be mind-boggling in terms of being extremely interesting and in terms of being extremely disturbing also at times.
Well, yeah, fascinating insights. As always, really appreciate you joining us on Prime Time. And, well, we're going to come to you with updates on that story as well. Now, India's love for online streaming is taking over its obsession with cinema as more and more Indians log on to services like Hotstar, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Voot and the like on their smartphones. We bring you a special report. Have a look. Okay, I have a question for all of you guys. Are you watching this show on your smartphones? Well, most likely so. Just to talk about the big digital surge in India and how best can all stakeholders involved ride this digital wave, I'll be joined by Nachiket Pantvedya, CEO at Alt Balaji, and Ashish Phirwani, partner and head advisory media and entertainment on Primetime Debate. But up next on Primetime Debate, we'll be talking about the Supreme Court judgment on euthanasia. Will this judgment provide relief for patients, or will it be open to misuse? To talk about that, we'll be joined by Prashant Bhushan, Senior Advocate at the Supreme Court, and Jayesh Lele, National Secretary, Hospital Board at the Indian Medical Association.
Life